just super pleased that everybody's here to just be part of the conversation, part of the discussion. My name is Jim Duffy. I'm with Hanover Studio, but in this role, I'm on the steering committee for Building Better SLO. And I see a lot of regular faces in the crowd, so thank you for coming again and again. We appreciate it. Good date night, I guess. Really, we started Building Better SLO for the simple purpose of having a conversation and starting conversations around topics having to do with how our city, or our region, and our county is going to grow in the future. It's been really rewarding to bring in the previous speakers that we've had to talk about different topics, and we're extremely pleased tonight to have Anyeley here giving her story about her work up in the Northwest. But first I want to say thank you to some of our, well, let me start off by saying thanks to our steering committee. Molly Kern, Will Ruloff, Andy Pease, Greg Wynn, and Bea. But Maki Cow, thank you. What's that? And Carolyn Burke. Sorry, Carolyn. A new addition to the team. And I'd like to say thank you to some of our city staff and officials here. Andy, of course, is on City Council. Erica Stewart, Derek Johnson, where's Michael? Michael Codrin. Somewhere in the back, but thank you so much for being here and supporting, you know, just again, this conversation that we're trying to have and get people talking about issues that are important and that need to happen if we're going to be proactive and planning for the future. I think, Derek, you told me years ago, you know, if you don't plan for the future, or failure to plan is planning to fail, or something like that. Is that right? But anyway, that's what we're about. I did want to say thank you to some of our sponsors. SLO is our lead sponsor for this evening. Ashley Vance Engineering, the City of San Luis Obispo, and Hanover Studio. And Inbound Screen Consulting, Fort Creeks Engineering. Hotel San Luis Obispo is always very generous to us with rates. And U.S. Greenfield Building Council and United Way, which is our fiscal sponsor. And thank you to our outreach sponsors, Land Conservancy, the Climate Coalition, the AIA, Race Matters, and Diversity Coalition. If in the future, if you are interested in sponsoring events, or you know somebody who would be interested in sponsoring an event, we're always welcome to have you join the team. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bea and have you introduce our speaker for the night, and we'll roll from there.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. I am really excited to be here today with you all to really learn in community from such an incredible speaker. As a city, San Luis Obispo continues to advance initiatives rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion. At the heart of those efforts is the pursuit of a community where all people feel valued, respected, and that they belong. Now, I want to be clear that this is no easy task, and it requires a multi-pronged effort across many sectors for us to feel the benefit of a collective investment in what our speaker refers to as economic, environmental, and social sustainability. In talking about these issues, I often get asked, well, what does that look like in practice for me? And the answer is that for all of us, it might look a bit different, which is why I'm excited for our speaker today to share about her experience and expertise in equity-centered development as an example of what this can look like in practice and how we can begin to develop the tools that can inspire all of us to be active participants in building a better SLO. Now, our featured speaker is a bit of a badass. Sorry, I didn't know a better way to describe that. So I'd be remiss if I did not do her introduction justice. Tonight, we are joined by Anyeley Hallova, the founder of Adre, an equity-centered real estate development company based in Portland, Oregon. Adre was founded with the purpose of developing building projects that create social and economic benefits for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC for short, through the creation of mixed-use developments, affordable homes, and facilities for mission-driven organizations. Hallova seeks to encourage innovation in the real estate industry by creating pathways to wealth creation and financial stability for BIPOC communities and organizations, exemplifying what it looks like to actively engage diverse workforce participation from project conception to completion. Prior to Adre, Anyeley was a partner with Portland development firm Project for 12 years, where she led development projects through entitlements and construction with a specialization in student housing, market rate housing, residences, and public-private projects. She also led the R&D team for Framework, the first high-rise wood building to be permitted in the United States. Hallova is also a leader in the U.S. mass timber movement. She currently serves on the board of the U.S. Green Building Council and is the chair of Oregon's Land Conservation and Development Commission. The Urban Land Institute recognized her as one of their 40 under 40 and one of the best young land use professionals around the globe. In 2022, she made the GRIS 50 Fixers list of emerging U.S. leaders in climate equity and sustainability who are working on fresh, real-world solutions to the world's biggest challenges. Anyeley will share her story behind the creation of Adre and her experience delivering innovative and equity-centered development projects. She will also discuss how to use tools and processes that are rooted in the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion to create tangible advancements in the built environment and what inclusive, sustainable development looks like from start to finish. Please join me in welcoming Anyeley.
Thank you. That was amazing. I was like, maybe I can just take that and maybe use that in the future. Thank you for having me here. I think, maybe not for you guys, but I think it's surreal for us in Portland to actually be meeting in person a lot of times. I've been doing a lot of Zoom conversations, so it's nice to see faces and get to converse with folks. And so yeah, with that, I just was going to start. It's sort of my presentation is kind of a combination of two presentations. One, talking about a project that I recently, in 2020, finished called Meyer Memorial Trust, their foundation and their headquarters. And then the second part is more thinking about my company and where I'm trying to go with the kind of things that I learned in that project. And so this is the first time I'm giving that almost like dual project presentation. Yeah, so I'm glad you did my intro, I don't have to do it. So 15 years I've been in development and $110 million worth of real estate projects that I've done. And my background, I have an undergrad from Cornell University in Environmental Systems Technology, a master's in city planning from MIT, and a master's in landscape architecture from Harvard. So essentially I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just continued going on, and then I got to the end and I was like, no, I'm not doing a PhD, I need to get out of here. And I sit on the board of the U.S. Green Building Council and just became chair. My first chairmanship, I guess, was last week at the Land Conservation and Development Commission. And my role, what that is it's a role you don't have in California, which is our state sets statewide zoning policy, and that gets enacted by the cities and the counties. And so it's more state heavy. And we just actually, I'm not here to talk about my work at the state, but we just passed climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking last week. So if you're interested in that kind of topic, it's sort of thinking about equity, but more on the zoning side, which is super exciting that passed. And so I was just going to do a little bit of background on thinking about sustainability and equity, because to me they've always been linked. When I was an undergrad, I did a semester abroad with a program called School for Field Studies, and they have different programs, and I went on the one to Costa Rica, and it was all about sustainable development, and this is like 1997 probably, before the term was like even out there. And we literally studied different production methods, you know, going and looking at, I don't know, like a factory, looking at farm production, and looked at it with the lens of these three lenses. And so everything we looked at, we had to analyze, like, is this economically sustainable, right? Can self-sustain itself economically? Is it environmentally sustainable? Is there regenerative quality? Is it create waste? You know, is there a byproduct that comes off of this? Or, you know, is there some recycling component? And then socially sustainable. Is this like taking advantage of workers and, you know, they're underpaid and will cause over time there to be some kind of issue socially because of the way this is being produced. Maybe people aren't getting paid enough, or, And so we would analyze everything with those three lenses. And then sort of I came back from that and was like, I want to do that, but it didn't exist. I didn't know where to go. And I was sort of my whole educational quest was trying to be like, who does that thing that I learned in Costa Rica? And the people that taught that program were more on the like economic side of it and more on the production, business production, not in the land fields. I'm not going to give my whole history of my life, but fast forward, I started working for a developer, a regional developer in Portland, and they were, at the time, the leader, I would say, of LEED certified buildings, and they had a lot of the first this and the first that came out of Portland. And they required all of their employees to go through a program called the Natural Step, which it's funny because you're talking about the future, and if you don't plan for the future in the present, like literally that's their whole philosophy that they have there. But with the idea of environmental sustainability. And so I sort of advanced my thinking in that. And then I took a U.S. Green Building Council LEED class and then learned more on the technical parts, I guess, when it relates to buildings. I really like this diet. Well, to go back to that, I guess I've always seen these, the whole point behind this stool is that if you take out one part of this, then the stool doesn't stand. And so I've always seen it that way, but it's really the environmental movement, kind of moved forward and launched, and everyone forgot that the actual foundation of sustainability was rooted in these three aspects. I'm just going to fast forward to talk about equity because a lot of the conversation I have is about equity and sort of like what is that, and I think it changes depending on the context, but I really like this diagram who asked one of my employees, find out who made this, because I actually never knew it, so it's all over the internet. And really thinking about, you have structural systems like this tree, and they're bent, in one way towards a certain group in society, let's just say, because the structural systems. So inequality is essentially unequal access to opportunity. And then, a lot of people say, well, let's make everything equal. And, they both got this ladder there. Obviously, that works for one person, but because of the inequality that's rooted in this tree, this young kid doesn't get anything. And then thinking forward, really, what is justice? Justice at the end of the day is fixing the actual inequality, being, fixing the system, which, propping up the tree, offering equal access, for opportunity. And then really thinking about equity while we still have systems that are not equal, and there's justice issues still out there. It's going to take giving more resources, or different resources, to folks that have sort of been left out of this, in this case, apples, in order to achieve that, thing that we strive for, which is more on the quality side. So I just wanted to kind of frame it that way before talking. And so I'm just going to launch into, I was a development partner at a company called Project for 12 years. And definitely we were a market rate developer, I did student housing, market rate housing, townhomes for sale. And what we did differently, if I were to say, was really a concentration on design. All three of us business partners were from a design background. And so we really cared about design. I think that's what we were known for. And then the sustainability was sort of just, it is, So all of our new buildings were LEED certified in some way, trying to do something different with each project. And then, I'm not going through my whole history, but I worked on a project called Framework, which was the first building to be permitted in the U.S. Out of wood that was a high-rise. And that was kind of my launch into what I would call more mission-driven projects. It was a all-wood building, so it had lower carbon footprint than a concrete or steel building. It was going to be a resilient building, so it could rock and recenter during an earthquake. That part never really got picked up by people, but internally we really liked that part. It was going to be, I'm going to refer to the term MWESB because that's how they call it in Oregon, but it's Minority, Women, and Emerging Small Businesses. There was going to be a component of that. It was going to have affordable housing, and the list goes on. It was a lot. That project didn't end up getting built, but the R&D, the research that went into that project actually is a big catalyst for a lot of the mass timber buildings that are going on. So I kind of did that, and then I did the Nature Conservancy, their headquarters in Oregon, which was really a great exploration in regional materials and sustainability. And then it sort of like was building. It led to this project with a foundation called Minor Memorial Trust, who I would say definitely is a leader in Oregon and probably in the United States with regard to foundations, caring about how they give and how they invest and thinking about equity and sustainability. And so it was great to suddenly have a client who was like, we want you to see this as far as we can go. So, some of their missions are about, supporting rural and forestry-based jobs, supporting innovation in Oregon, supporting BIPOC and women-owned businesses, and I can't read that one, and so I don't remember what it is. They have three goals that center around the work that they do, and that's them in the way that they give. And so how do you build a building for a group that's so, they were the ones that basically asked all the nonprofits, if you're going to submit to us for grants, you need to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. You need to tell us how diverse your board is. And so I was on a board actually called 1,000 Friends of Oregon at the time, and I remember being on the board like, oh my God, we need to come up with a DEI statement because Meyer is requiring us to do this. And so they've really been kind of a change maker, I would say, in that landscape. And so there was a lot that went into figuring out like what piece of land, because they were renting in a building and we were actually finding them a new property. But it was a redevelopment of a former tow yard. It was in historic Albina, which has long been home to the Portland's Black community, and there's been a lot of major infrastructure projects like roads and the Coliseum and the hospital coming in and essentially kicking out folks in the 60s and the 70s. And so there's a lot of interesting history with regard to the lack of equity in that case, and actually overt racism and discrimination. This area was the former redlined area where, a lot of lack of investment in the area. And so our job in this project was to prioritize equity across the workforce and really have this commitment to sustainability. And what was great about this project, which is why I can talk about it today, I feel like, is it was trying to be a replicable model for a commercial development. So unlike some other projects that are super mission oriented, but like you look at it and you're like, okay, no one else can do that, that's great. The whole point of this was to be like, we're taking commercial market rate standards and we're still trying to achieve that. So on the sustainability goals, I'm kind of jumping to the conclusion, we were the first LEED Platinum version 4, that's the latest version, building in Oregon. Actually, I think we have a 4.1 now. Path to Net Zero, which is a program that we have in Oregon that encourages, setting up your building that it can be net zero in the future. And I kind of put these two awards there because we were recognized for an FSE award, which deals with sustainable wood, and kind of USGDC leadership award for the work that went into this. Fully electrical building, there's a solar array on the top, and it essentially performs in the top 1% of buildings of similar types and uses 30% less energy and carbon over what we would say a code standard. Some other things I think in general people are now starting to put electric vehicle charging in there. And then really monitoring the energy performance of the building as it's finished. You can see here, you can walk into the lobby and see like how much the solar is producing versus how much are we consuming. So really having that feedback loop. And then the idea of the low carbon construction materials, the building's completely made out of wood. It's actually a mixture between stick frame construction and mass plywood, which is a product that's come out of Oregon, a new mass timber product. And I've been fortunate that the architects who are Lever Architecture worked with me on the framework project, then the Nature Conservancy, and then this. They really love to, experiment sounds like a bad word in this case, but they like to innovate with regard to new building materials. And so we were innovating on the cross-laminated timber, and then in this building, it was the first building to showcase mass plywood in more of a upfront and beautiful setting than kind of a back of house setting. The design of the building was actually made, the actual design was made with the goals in mind. And so you can see the roof form, which looks very interesting, was actually made with the intent of having the perfect angle for solar energy. This part of the building is made out of mass plywood, and this is made out of stick construction. We could have made the whole building out of mass plywood, but we were going, I'm kind of skipping a little, we were going for equity goals of having a certain percentage of minority women and emerging small businesses. And a lot of those folks don't have exposure to this new technology called mass plywood. So we were like, okay, if we do this whole building and have these goals, that's not a good match for folks that haven't done it before, yet you want to get those folks in this new technology. So why not do part of the building with the new technology and part of it not, so that people can work on something that's familiar to them, but also work on something that's new and add that to their resume. So that's how we were thinking, you know, that was the goal in mind, and then like, how do we design the building for that goal? On the innovative side, we had, you know, one of these car matrix, you know, where you can park your car and it sorts it. You know, high focus on bike commuting, big focus on indoor air quality, because what you can't see from the original picture is it's right next to the highway, like right next to the highway. So indoor air quality was a big thing, and what's great about that is, you know, now we're thinking more about resilient buildings. And after we built this building, we had the heat dome, right, right after we built it, and then we had fires. And I remember Meyer came to us and was like, okay, what do we need to change? You know, everybody's like, how do we need to, and then COVID. And so everybody's like, what do we need to change in our buildings, right? Everybody's trying to respond to it. And we were like, it's fine, we're good. You know, there was nothing that they had to do to respond to any of those situations on indoor air quality. And that's, you know, really what we need for the future is resilient buildings. Recycle, dealing with your stormwater is big. It rains a lot in Portland, so it's like it consumes it's a whole exercise, how to deal with your stormwater. Another part of this that we wanted to do, it's almost like we have side projects. It's very hard to talk about this project because it's a lot. One of our side projects was thinking about sustainable wood, and this goes along to the idea of we didn't want to just throw money at this project. So we could have easily said 100% of the building has to be FSC certified wood, which is a high standard of sustainable wood certification. We knew that in some cases that would be cost neutral, in some cases that would be slightly more expensive, in some cases would be a lot more expensive. So rather than do that, Meyer, in conjunction with a nonprofit called Sustainable Northwest, together came up with their own standard for what is sustainable wood with these priorities, dealing with sourcing wood products from rural, tribal, or minority women and emerging small businesses, thinking about, you know, how's the forest managed. Second priority being FSC certified wood or other, you know, salvage, you know, other forms of wood that they would consider sustainable. And then prioritizing wood from the region being Oregon first, then Pacific Northwest, and then North America. Meyer Mullen Trust only gives in Oregon, so they're very Oregon-centric. And so for all the 12 wood products that we had in the building, we came up with a green, yellow, red, like kind of how sustainable it is or isn't, and then a cost premium to go, like if you wanted to go to green, how much would that cost? And then made choices based on that with the idea that we don't want to spend a lot of money, but we still want to get sustainable wood. And so the result was that we got 85%, which we deemed as sustainable wood. 49% of that ended up being FSC certified. I forgot to mention equity was a part of this. So it wasn't just in that idea of the stool. We weren't just like super sustainability with disregard to who it comes from. So we had 50% Black, Indigenous, and people of color businesses, and then 58% small businesses. And so for this wood package, we only had a 3% premium to achieve all those things. I think what's not included in any premiums is like the sweat labor, the mental energy that it took, but it was all of our team members, the architect, the contractor, me, Meyer, we all were like, we're committed to this. And you can see the kind of dots about where that wood came from. With the idea, because this idea was supposed to be a knowledge sharing, Sustainable Northwest did a case study, a case study for making sustainable wood sourcing choices. And really, Meyer and us relied on this nonprofit who's in the know about that piece of land and how are they planting trees there, what are they doing? They know that very detailed information, and they would say that's sustainable, that's not sustainable. And so partnering, I think, is important on that. What's great is Sustainable Northwest and Lever Architecture, so two of the team members, not me, went for a USDA Wood Innovations grant and essentially are creating an open source database with the idea that the next project doesn't have to do what we did, right? There's going to be a vetting. You can just be like, I want sustainable wood, and then just go to the database and start to pick products based on that, and that people would start to know that these people are doing good practices, and we should support them. So I feel like a lot of these, there's like case studies, and they go off and do this project. And I forgot to mention, when we did the framework project, it's like pieces of our team went off and did this research project or this. So all these things are continuing to advance, whether it includes all of us or not. This is a picture of the mass plywood being put in place. It looks similar to cross-laminated timber, but it's actually plywood. So it's like massive plywood, mass plywood. And our mass plywood didn't fit into the sustainable wood category. It wasn't one of the things that fit there, but it was a decision made. We want to support Oregon innovation, rural jobs, and we will forego our sustainability values in this regard because we have this overall sustainability that we're meeting in other regards. So what I like about this process is it wasn't religious in that way. And there were some hard choices, I think, made during the process in that regard. So I kept talking to people about the results of the project, but a lot of people kept asking me like about the process. And so I came up with this diagram that basically shows how we went about all this. We can't do this without partnership. And our contractor was heavily vested, involved, and interested. And it was a partnership between a longstanding Walsh Construction, I think Walsh Construction is an employee-owned firm, and then a Black-owned smaller construction firm. They partner together. They partner, so it's not the first time they partner together. And both of them have very community-oriented goals in both of their companies. And so it was really sitting down with them and being like, how can we advance this industry? Like, come up with a bunch of ideas. So when we did the RFP for the contractor with our limited knowledge, we put, minority women and emerging small businesses, we want 30%. And we're not as concerned with the emerging small business part. Meyer was more concerned with the minority and women part, so we specifically made goals for that. We knew we wanted to have a diverse workforce on the job site. We didn't want this idea that, we're in this Black community, Meyer, the way they live, you drive by the job site and you're like, nobody's getting jobs, from the community. So, the minority, women, and emerging small business is more about who owns the business, where the diverse workforce partition is about who gets hired by the business. And so we wanted to have a goal in that regard. So we put 20%. And all these percentages are a percentage of the cost of the job. So the dollar spent on the job, 20% would go to, helping these are more job costs. This is actually probably, I think, more man hours. This is hours, or woman hours. When we actually talked to the contractor, they had different ideas. So this is their ideas. They were like, oh, let's not have this goal at all. Let's go for minority women, the minority and women. I think we can do a lot higher than that. We're like, okay. And then they're like, let's actually separate these two out. Let's have a goal for that and a goal for that. And then we all decided, let's do some stretch opportunities, things that would test us and be interesting experiments. And so one of them was about, because we didn't have any apprenticeship hour goals, but they had an idea of, let's track how many we give opportunities to graduates from pre-apprenticeship programs. And let's try to get 10 opportunities from folks that are entering pre-apprenticeship programs. And then we had a goal, this is a really interesting one. This number here is based on the cost of the job. We had a goal, like there's different scopes of work. The person who does the flooring, the structural, the HVAC. We wanted 80% of those scopes of work to go to minority and women-owned businesses. And a lot of times when you go for goals like this, you end up doing very not the main components of the building, right? You're like, okay, we're gonna have the flaggers, we got the painters, we got janitorial, but we were like, if we make ourselves have a goal like this, we actually have to start doing things differently. And so to make this goal, that's why we but that's why we were talking about the design of the building, because we're like, we can't get, probably in our context, minority electrical engineering, mechanical, and plumbing that's had that experience, right, to meet our 80% goal without thinking about how the building's designed. And so this caused us to think very differently, I would say. And then we all agreed that we wanted to have what we call stretch opportunities. So for minority and women businesses, like they've never done this scale of a project before. But if they do this project, then they have this on the resume for the next project, right? And helping people grow, because that's a lot of things with minority and women-owned businesses. It's like they exist at a certain level and they have a really hard time because they don't have the relationships and kind of that institutional relationships. And so what we did here, it was a shared risk. So we all said, we've identified who we think collectively are stretch folks, and if something comes up with those stretch folks, you'll come to me on the development side, you'll be like, this is an issue, and then we'll talk about, we're not gonna force them to remake it, or we don't wanna put the companies in a position where they do this job and suddenly they're out of business because we push them in a way that doesn't work for them. What's interesting about this is every time they came to me and told me something, what's up with the job, I'd be like, is it one of the stretch opportunities? They say no, and I was like, I don't want to hear it. So I think there was only one instance that it was a stretch, and we sat there, and the architect's like, could we live with, we want it perfect, but it's, and so it was a conversation. We also put some dollars toward the contractor to help with drawing some of the drawing sets that maybe the smaller companies don't have. To support those companies. So that was a big one. And so this is what actually happened at the end of the day. And that's what I was presenting to folks, but they didn't understand how we got there. And we had 55 on the MWESB, 47% minority and women businesses. We put in there a design one because after we had our design team, we're like, well, we probably should put that in. And we got to 39%. In the minority job hours on the site, I was shocked, we got that high, but a lot of that has to do with relationships. And then we met that, we decided let's report our apprenticeships hours while we're at it, because we have, they did it. We met these two goals quite easy. I don't want to say quite easily. We met them because our whole structure was set up on that. So when we picked the subcontractors, we set it up to be that. So that was a goal to make. This was the one that we were like, oh, that didn't really work out. Partly because the contractor didn't realize, like, people don't really track. There's no system to really track who are the pre-apprenticeships on the program. And so I just said 3+ because we just, at the end, they were like, we actually don't really know how that went. So that was like, note to self, if you want to do some pre-apprenticeship thing, we need a better system for thinking about that. You can't do this work without a bunch of other people helping. So we had, a nonprofit, Sustainable Northwest. We had trade organizations, including the National Association of Minority Contractors. So folks that are on the ground and know people. And then these pre-apprenticeship programs were really important to helping with that. I just thought I should take you through to show you what the building looks like. So this is where it's located in Portland on the north. It's technically in North Portland, but like northeast Portland, and you can see the highway. This used to be a thriving African American community that was essentially decimated by the highway, where the Trailblazers are, major Portland Public School, major infrastructure. And if you're interested in like a larger approach to equity, there's a group called the Albino Vision Trust, and they are pushing to essentially reclaim this area and thinking about governance systems and structures and ownership, how redevelopment of that area can go back into helping the Black community, which essentially was stripped of wealth by being kicked out of this area. So this is what the site used to look like. It's a tow yard. Nobody was sad that it was gone. that was another thing that was important. They didn't want to buy a house and tear it down. They didn't want to take anything beloved from the community. They really wanted to be a positive force. So the tow yard was easy. This was the cars, before, and this is the building now. It's around 20,000 square feet. Construction is around 10. The total cost is around 20 million. And this is, there was a center for great purposes because the guy, Fred Meyer, do you have Fred Meyer's? Okay, it's a grocery store. So Fred Meyer, his Meyer Memorial Trust is from his money. An interesting part about it is because he had no kids or relatives, it's not family controlled. And at the same time, he made a super flexible system where it could change. And so that's how they've been able to, like, they were just, I would call it like I don't know what kind of foundation they were before, but they had a moment where they were like, we're changing everything to become equity-centered. And they just recently did another version of that, which is we're changing everything to become justice-centered. So they just did that with an anti-racist, anti-feminist lens. So they have that flexibility as a foundation. And they created a center for great purposes where folks can come in and kind of converse. This is the lobby, welcome room. And this is kind of this pre-function area, that's how we call it internally, to that Center for Great Purposes. We wanted to showcase the mass plywood because mass plywood is, I think if you just saw it in its raw state, you would just be like, this is not very nice material. And we wanted to show that you can make it very nice. And so you can see kind of this mass plywood feature stair and some of that mass plywood there. And so this is where the mass plywood was used in this Center for Great Purposes with the garden here. And then a garden, so where you saw all those cars in the lobby is now this garden and the Center for Great Purposes. And you can get a sense here of the solar that's on all of those. And the highway is right here, if you want to see the highway's right there. There's a lot I could talk about this building, but this is the lunchroom, and they have a deck looking out, beautiful views of the downtown Portland. And really creating a space for their employees, obviously, was the main focus, and then also thinking about visitors to the space. They have equity. I could talk a lot about the project. We can talk for an hour about the project. But some of the equity considerations were not putting private offices for the leadership on the corner of the building, things like that, where the best spaces in the building are actually reserved for the employees. And so this is like one of the best spaces. It's actually this library that folks can go into and hang out. And then also even between their leadership staff, they have equal size rooms. They also, it doubles up as a meeting room so that when the leadership isn't there, the staff can use it as a meeting room. So even thinking about hierarchy and those relationships in their building was important. And then really thinking about the storytelling and art in the building. They internally looked at their, they had sort of accumulated a lot of art in their past life before they became equity-centered and realized that their art collection didn't reflect their values as an organization. It didn't reflect the diversity of Oregon. And so they divested in a lot of their art, they sold it, and then they commissioned some new pieces and acquired some new pieces that were from more diverse artists. This is just fun for people in the know because this is something they had in their old building that people like either loved it or hated it. And they kind of placed it within this new mural. And they had people from the Native American community, Latinx community, black folks, a lot of that new art that they acquired. And so this gives you just kind of like a little taste, this is America, a stolen and plundered land, and you get that when you get in the bathroom. But they didn't want to be like doomsday. They also wanted to be joyful and playful and inspirational. And so they have this wall, which is like quotes from famous people interspersed with quotes from their staff. This is really centered on thinking about the tribes that lived in this area prior. The planting and the landscape was specific. The plants were specifically picked for their medicinal or food properties that Indigenous communities would use. They have, the restroom signage is in different languages. Not every single thing is in different languages, but it's giving you, when you get in there, you're like, there's stories and places, and you say, like, this is a different place. This is Fred Meyer. And all giving give thought. And then, it was during coronavirus, so that happened. And so kind of the lessons learned from this project is really about selecting diverse partners that value this work is important. Developing clear equity goals. We couldn't have achieved all this if we didn't have clear goals. Being prepared to stretch capabilities and increase risk. And that's sort of going on that idea of that shared risk. We identified it. What is the risk here? What is not the risk here? Versus calling it all risk or calling it no risk. Don't limit the equity conversations to construction. Like how we acquired the land, we used a broker it was a residential broker, African-American guy who had never done commercial brokerage, and said, hey, this is gonna be your first commercial brokerage project. And I saw him the other day and he was like telling somebody about his business, and he turned to me and was like, oh my God, it all started with you. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, after I did that, I was like, I can do that. And now he does commercial brokerage and also commercial property management. And it was like that moment where we all forgot to tell each other, like, what happened afterwards? But that was the point, right? It was give a person an opportunity that they hadn't had before. How decisions were made, I could do a whole speech on that. Like, there was voting over like the different chairs in the building. A lot of the furniture was designed for different body types, sizes, abilities. And seeking advice from outside partners. We're fortunate to have Meyer, who could actually go to a lot of the partners they give to and be like, we're thinking about doing this Native American thing. Like, can you help us read this and make sure that we're doing it appropriately and respectfully? And then think beyond checking boxes. I think we had the freedom, because there was no government mandate telling us what to do. We had the freedom to be like, we'll try this and we'll try that, because we were into it. And then, we were bringing some people along on the journey, and then we were all learning, growing, and evolving. I was kind of overwhelmed when I put the slide together. What has been the industry response to this? We received 14 awards to date. The biggest one for me is this ULI Americas Award, because it's the top 10 development projects in the country, in the South and North America. And now we're in the running for the global competition in the fall. So that was super important to me, obviously, from the development side. But the architects won the top architecture projects in the nation. And then USGBC, Fast Company, Metropolis, this is our Portland Business Journal. We won something from Canada, which I didn't know was possible. Local Oregon, AIA, and then the other Journal of Commerce. Yeah, so the industry has been very excited about this. And I don't know if it's true, I need to look back, but maybe this, they have a special designation for equitable development, which I feel like they might not have had before. And so this also got the special designation, and another project did too. So you might want to check out the other project that got that. And then how many minutes do I have? Oh, good, okay. So within 2020, I was finishing that project, COVID hit, right? I was working on housing equity policy at the state, about thinking about equity as it relates to housing and land use policy. There were a lot of protests in Portland, social justice protests. I was kind of living it, given where my neighborhood is, like hearing tear gas and hearing the police on horn. It was a lot going, helicopters. There was a lot going on. And then just started to think, my next project after Marno was a multifamily housing project where I was trying to do some stuff. It was interesting, but it wasn't all that. And I was like, I don't know if I could just go back to regular development at this point. And so I think all of that. And then I went on a road trip and listened to the book Color of Law, which I recommend for everybody, by Richard Rothstein, who's actually at UC Berkeley, I think, affiliated. And it's about housing discrimination in the United States. And it's like kind of things you're like, oh, I kind of know that, I kind of know that. But he puts it together, it's a history book. And sort of I came back from that going, okay, I'm leaving my partnership, I'm starting my own company. Just because I knew that if I didn't do, if I didn't pursue this, like who would, type thing. And so I started my new company called Adre, which means the number 7 in the West African language of Ewe. My dad is Ewe, my family. But also thinking about tribal and First Nation communities and the value on 7 generations, which I don't know how many of you know about 7 generations, but it's the idea. I actually talked to a friend of mine who I always thought it was 7 generations into the future. She was like, no, you are 1 generation and you look back 3 generations and then you look forward 3 generations. So never going forward without looking back. So it's like, oh, that's interesting. 7 is the name. And the ideas of design excellence, which were in my last company, environmental stewardship, which were in my last company, actually development innovation, which was in the last company, but adding equitable outcomes to that. And so it's sort of under this premise, 2-part premise, which is essentially what we were talking about this whole time, where the U.S. population, and this was specifically written for a pitch for when I was talking about Black businesses, so that's why there's a lot of Black community references, but 13.4% of the U.S. population are Black, but only make 5% of real estate professionals, and then 2% of real estate management firms are BIPOC owned. And then, there's a lot of talk, and you can probably read about it, about Black homeownership rates, have declined so much that they're nearly at the same rate as it was in 1960s when housing discrimination was still legal. So we're not getting any better at any of this. And then the exclusion and underrepresentation everywhere in the United States has resulted in development patterns that are laced with implicit bias. In the Oregon context, like as a Black person, you couldn't even live in the state. It was intended to be a white utopia. Oregon was founded with that intent, and it had like one of the, I think it was like the highest Ku Klux Klan besides Louisiana. There's like a lot of history that you don't know about Oregon. So obviously that affects land patterns and who can own land and who has control. In the Native American community, obviously the land was taken from them. And then we have this climate emergency. Building operations and construction account for 40% of the world's carbon emissions. And I think a lot of times we think about the 60% part, and we forget the 40% as buildings. And the climate crises have disproportionate impacts on low-income and BIPOC communities. All these heat dome effects that we were seeing, really affected a lot of communities. And so the idea is that, real estate professionals and everyone who's associated with this field should launch a more resilient building industry. So we're trying to, for the presentation I did this for, I was trying to think of like, what is the idea about equity across a project? Really thinking about who owns the land, who's the developer, who designs the building, who builds the building, who uses the building, and then who owns the building. And realizing that at each step of the way, be it redlining, exclusion of no funding, you can't be what you can't see, right? If you don't see diversity, it's sort of like that thing's not for you. Disparities in lending, that's still huge, even though you see all these things about, funds going out. If you actually look at the numbers, banks still aren't giving out a good amount to BIPOC businesses. And then new buildings are expensive, and only the wealthy can afford is an issue about who uses the buildings, especially the nicely designed, sustainable ones. And then who owns it? Communities have been stripped of wealth creation opportunities, as you could see in the case when the highway came through in Portland. Literally wealth was taken. And so, could there be solutions at every step of the development process? For me, this is for me. I'm trying to look to partner with BIPOC landowners. There's me. I'm trying to get design teams that are grounded in diversity, equity, inclusion, and have lived experiences. And a lot of the folks I'm talking to are trying to get more diverse representation in their firms, with the goal of this 30% BIPOC women-owned business. Obviously, some other projects, in order to get brand new projects that serve BIPOC communities, we need a lot of government foundation support and impact investors. And then for my market rate projects, I've of course just given myself a hard goal. We'll see. It'd be nice if 50% of my buildings were owned, because really real estate creates wealth. So these are things that I'm thinking about, and I started my business essentially at the beginning of 2021. And so my deal with me was I'm going to launch big ideas, and then I'm going to attract people who are into that. I'm going to go big. And so in thinking about your business, if you have a development business or otherwise, considering that timeline that I just showed, ownership, programming, who gets economic benefit from your projects, and especially in the market rate world, you can't do all the things that Meyer did, you can't. So what can you do on this project? You have a project, and you do something different that you don't normally do on this project, and then maybe the next project, and then maybe those things become very easy after time, and then you can combine them. Making sure to build diverse teams internally, in your companies with marketing and recruiting. Externally, this would be, setting goals for participation. And then, Meyer has this tool called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Spectrum tool. And they actually required us to use to require all of the people involved in the project to fill out this tool. And it wasn't used to exclude anybody and say, we're not hiring you. It was more used and people appreciated it. They were like, wow, we filled out this tool, and we didn't realize that we're not thinking about this. And so it's like, think about your vision, your commitment, your leadership, your policies, your infrastructure training, diversity, data is important, decision-making, accountability, and the Spectrum tool is like, take your thing. I have not even started thinking about a DEI vision versus, I have the most amazing DEI vision ever. And forcing folks to go through that and then talking through it. And so I'm doing this now with my company where when they submit, like, you want to be, I don't know, a mechanical engineer on this project, can you fill out this form? And like I said, I've never used it to decide. I mean, one could. We've used it more as in, like, hopefully the next time they fill it out, something has changed, right, on the map. This is something I'm doing. It's my experiment, which is, I was like, oh, I can tell my accountant to track all of our expenses, because normally you do the construction, and then now people are thinking about design, and I'm like, well, it's in the accounting software, just track them all. Lawyers, whoever. So I'll be able to see at the end of my new projects how much of the whole dollars, because like on the Meyer, it's $10 million for construction, but the project was $20 million. So what about the rest of those dollars? And then there's, different people ask me a lot about, like, how do you measure? We're at the start of this. This is like the very ground zero start. And so there really isn't a lot of stuff out there. Even though I'm on the board, I haven't really even, USGBC, I haven't delved into. I hear that there's equity credits. So in the next project I have, maybe we'll try some of those innovation credits. Living Futures, which does the Living Building Institute, they have a JUST label, which is more centered on what's your business doing to be, like, internally, what you're doing, not externally. And then I was part of a group called the Soul District in Portland, where we tried to come up with our own scorecard. I don't think it's official to debut or anything, but it would be nicer to have somebody do a robust version of that. And I know, like, JLL, for example, they're thinking hard on this. There's people in the industry thinking. So this is the JUST label. So it just says, like, how this company, which I happen to know them, Hannah Eddy, this is on the website, I just pulled it, how they're doing in these different internal ways of being equitable in their company. And then this was the scorecard I was telling you that we came up with, which was, the concept behind it was, if you want to come and develop in the Black community, rather than people opposing or agreeing or whatever, wouldn't it be nice if there was a scorecard that said, I'm meeting certain, economic development, social responsibility, or workforce goals, and then the community could get behind that and say, that's a good project, right? That's the way I was thinking of it. But we never ended up using it, but it's an interesting exercise. And then I won't talk about all my projects, but you might think, okay, you come up with these big goals, like what does that actually mean in projects? I just have 3 projects here. One is for the Black United Fund, and it's intended to be owned by nonprofits and foundations, so that ownership component, right? And they're all centered on BIPOC issues. This is a big one. Like, this would be, I think, equivalent to the Meyer or the Framework project in the sense it's like, if you pull this off, it'll be big. Partly because this was land taken by a hospital and a redevelopment agency, and the hospital essentially is giving back the land to the Black community with Black community priorities in mind. And they did an RFP. I put together a team that won it. And so I could talk a long time about this, but we're just at the start of this. But why I say it could be big is if we could figure out how to do this, there's a lot of communities that have the exact same issue. And then, how does this translate to market rate development? This is a market rate office project that we're doing for creative tenants. And this is taking that resilient building technology that we did for Framework, like bring back the Framework team, to finally build that resilience so it can rock and recenter during an earthquake. And we just won USDA net zero mass timber grant like a month ago to help fund this effort. And so the idea is we will permit this just like we did Framework, and then it makes it easier for everyone else to do it afterwards.